everybody hung out all the way to the end of the day, right? Let's make this worth your while. If you're in the right place, we're going to talk about the 3 pitfalls that everyone should avoid with cloud data. Basically, we could talk about hundreds and hundreds of pitfalls, right? Who here's working on cloud native projects? Any idea what I mean when I say cloud native? What we're talking about is anybody that's doing stuff with containers, Kubernetes, working in Amazon, Google, any of those kind of things when you're developing stuff, then you're going to run into some of these pitfalls. And most of these have come from my experiences of talking with a lot of customers across Europe, the US, and in Asia, as this has evolved. So from way back in 2010-ish up till now. So we've been around a while. We're going to look at 3 things. We're going to walk through each one of these in detail. We're going to talk about what the cloud is in data and what we're referring to kind of give you a baseline. We're going to look at observability as data, because you not only have the applications you're doing and the development you're doing, but you also have the other side where people are trying to monitor and use tools to keep track of these vast landscapes that you're doing in the cloud. And most people forget that part. And then we're going to look at what I think is one of the more crucial ops out there is FinOps. Do I happen to have a FinOps, somebody in the room? They're pretty rare animals, so it's not often you get a live sighting. All right, let's get started. I think this image pretty much says it, right? Everything was been promised that the cloud's going to be fantastic, and how many people have had the feeling like you dropped your ice cream? We've all dropped our ice cream once we were young, right? That's basically what you're getting from the feeling of getting into the cloud. It's supposed to solve all your problems, right? Talk to some of these really big organizations like Uber and stuff that runs such a vast landscape in the cloud, and how hard that's been to achieve where they're at, and how much they have to work on it, and how many developers they need to maintain and to run this on both sides, just to build it and maintain it, and to observe it and monitor what's going on. Does anybody in the room carry a beeper for their organization? So I just have a bunch of developers in the room, so you guys are going to be completely surprised about what you see. The baseline concept of what happens in the cloud is they make their money by putting water through a pipe. So your data going through the pipe in and out of the cloud is how they're making money. So the big deal, the baseline is if you're doing something out there and want to bring the data to you, that costs money. If you're doing stuff down here and want to push it back out to the cloud, that costs a lot of money. So we saw an architectural talk just before this one. Probably want to rethink how you architect applications when you used to do it in your own data centers, when you owned your own storage, you owned your own pipeline. It didn't cost anything to transfer data back and forth. Good example of this is a very large European airport that I'm pretty good friends with the guy that does the development there. And they were setting up analytics on all the data they collect in an airport. So everything we do when we walk around and go through retail stores, traffic flow, all this stuff, baggage, check-ins, where people are doing things, they wanted to run analytics on that. So they were collecting all this data in the cloud with microservices. I thought it'd be a great idea to do analytics on it and pump it all down into this data center, do analytics. They did that once and figured out, ooh, this costs way, way too much. Can't be pushing data back and forth. So you have to re-architect your application to do questions to some place where the data stays. That's a different kind of approach to how you're developing. So it's really important that you understand water through the pipe is very expensive, yeah? A really good example here, and not many people can come up with an example of why you would not want to go to the cloud, because if you listen to the Googles, the Amazons, and everybody, the cloud's just everything, right? It's everything. That's where we need to be. That's where we're going to go. Has anybody here thought about how long have we been using containers? How long has that been around? Or you think maybe we're getting to the end of the cycle where there's going to be something new? And what do we do then? It's going to be different. Well, here's an example. It's a little bit of an old example, but it was in the early days of cloud. And they were being approached. It was a very large publishing organization in Belgium. And they owned websites in Belgium and in the Netherlands, here in Europe. Do you remember the terrorist attacks in Paris? When that happened, they kind of locked down the city. They were chasing these terrorists around, trying to figure out what's going on. What do we all do? We whip out our phones and our laptops and start trying to figure out the news sites, right? They did that in Paris, too. They crashed all the French-speaking websites. Well, just across the border in France, part of this group, is a place called Wallonia. It's a region where they also speak a lot of French. They had a couple of websites. Guess what happened? Boom. So much traffic, so much data coming across their data centers that this would have bankrupted the entire group if they would have been in the cloud, just based on the bandwidth costs that they'd been quoted at the time from a cloud provider I will not mention. I used to mention him because he did in the talk. This was the CIO that did this on a talk publicly, but they got a little upset when I kept mentioning their name. But things have changed since then. But realize this is a use case where they buy data centers and real servers. They don't do microservices, they don't do containers, and they don't want to go into the cloud because of this kind of a reason. You don't see a lot of these cases, but they're out there. And what's it got to do with? Water through the pipe, right? All right, get to the second section. Ollie is, anybody know what the Kubernetes short word is? K8S. The 8 stands for how many letters are in between the K and the S. Well, observability is not a fun one to type on social media either, so they did this. This is Ollie with it's 11 letters in between the O and the Y. So Ollie is data. Observability is nothing but data. So when you're doing, in the old days, admin, you had a little dashboard and you had some stuff you were doing with some very simple tools, monitoring applications. Now it's a vast landscape. It's a vast collection of data. You're collecting OS level stuff, hardware level stuff, your system stuff, app stuff, probably stuff on your tools that you're observing with. There's all kinds of stuff coming. And there's a lot of stuff coming you don't even know about or care about, because Kubernetes spins up and it starts emitting all kinds of stuff about pods and about containers and about IDs and tags and labels. It's crazy. So if you think about trying to do this across your entire landscape, do you have any idea the amount of data that's coming at you? And when it's coming at you, you're using a small percentage of that to draw a dashboard to keep an eye on what's going on. Because you're only interested in something that's going on with an order service for something I'm trying to sell in my retail organization. I'm not interested in pods and IDs and these labels. In the company I work in, we have a landscape that we run for them, and across our customer base, we found that 60% of the data that they ingest is useless, meaning there's no dashboard, there's no rule, there's no alert, there's no person looking at it, nothing. But when you ingest, that's one cost, and when you store it, that's another. And they all love for you to store it, because who hasn't heard, hey, you might need it later, right? So doing this across your landscape, you need to understand what you're talking about here. There is so much coming. This is a quote from an article I saw, and this is right on the money. So nobody would care what all this costs if we had better outcomes. If we were making more money, if we were able to remediate our systems faster, detect problems faster, customers were happy. I don't care. Who wouldn't spend on that, right? If I can make millions and millions of dollars, I'll spend a couple million on observability, don't care. It becomes a problem when your customer and your business gets passed by the data that's being used to monitor this business. And the pandemic gave us a lot of examples of this. So it's a US example. Does everybody know what DoorDash is? Does anybody not know? That's probably easier. DoorDash is sort of like a food delivery system, right? So you order some food, you point the DoorDash people at it, they go get it, whether it's a bicycle, a car, whatever, and they bring it to your door. I don't know what the Croatian version of that is. Maybe Uber Eats or something like that. They're huge. They got really big over there, right? So they were born in the cloud. They did everything in the cloud, but they didn't realize what was going to happen when it went like this. And when you do cloud development, you describe the system you want to run, and it scales automatically. So if 10 people come, I have so many things running. But if 1 million people come, I now have a lot more stuff running, right? It just happens, and here comes the bill. You know? Another good one is Robinhood. This is a trading app, right? Remember GameStop? Some guys got onto a chat board and said, hey, let's do this and screw the banks on Wall Street, right? Boom. Yeah, it's so many people that showed up on that platform. They didn't account for that. This is exactly what happened. Their observability went like this. They made a lot more money, but it was like this, because there's so much data you're not using. Turns out that Robinhood uses probably less than 10% of the data they were ingesting. That's crazy, right? That's crazy. That's true. Oops, wrong way. Just to give you a very small example, you can find them all over the internet. I grabbed one, it's in the speaker notes. This one is just a simple Hello World app with some fake, like pinging a website front end. does some measurements, collects this stuff, gives you a generic amount of data that he's storing. Look at that number, man. That's half a terabyte of data for a simple 4-node cluster. That's just like a very, very basic thing in the cloud world. And this is one application you're running, one, with monitoring. Imagine if you're running 1 million. See these microservice things where we're ingesting millions and millions of transactions per minute. You know, what do you think that looks like? Are you ready for that kind of stuff? On top of that, not only are you dealing with all this data, on average, across organizations around the world, they're storing this for 13 months. All of it, across the board. And most organizations aren't sophisticated. It's not that they're not trying to be, it's just that it's getting away from you very quickly. So you think, okay, the policy in this company is going to be 13 months. But they don't think about the training cluster you just started up, just to run a developer training thing for a week and then take it down. And all that data got stored for 13 months. You're paying for that. That might be stuff you just want to throw away if you had the right kind of policies in place, you know? And there's places that are required by law to do it much longer. I'm sure banks and probably credit card, things like that have to be much longer. But this is just a small example of what the average is. You can imagine this. I thought this one was super funny, so I kind of slid it in. This is somebody that went onto a Reddit thread, and there's a link in it. You can go look at it and watch the rest of the discussion because it gets really crazy. But somebody at the front really innocently asked, hey, I'm trying to put something to do with traces. So not just metrics, but traces. So what do you think about doing some open source traces in my organization? Does anybody have any experience with that? And I swear to God, I could hear the sarcasm coming off the post of the guy. He says, exactly what it says there. He's like, oh my gosh, I can't even get him to care about developers just don't care. So, you know, you can want to do all this fancy stuff, and we can put fancy tools in place, and we can do all kinds of metrics, but if nobody cares, nobody looks at it, nobody uses it, right? That is not as uncommon as you think, right? I mean, how many developers here give a shit about observability, right? That's more tooling I don't really care about. It's what I used to think, right? That's very much the way it goes. So we did a 500 engineers and 500 engineers, and a combination of engineers and software developers were asked about what they do in their DevOps world, right? What this looks like. So being a developer in a DevOps team and dealing with cloud native stuff. So you see here, 87% of them said this absolutely increased the complexity. Not a surprise, I think, right? Anybody that's doing it, this shit gets harder, there's more tools, it moves faster, we got more things we got to do. This is not a surprise. This one blew my mind. So think about this. We have our landscape, and we have our DevOps teams over here doing all this cool stuff to build stuff for our customers, and all of a sudden, 25% of my time is over here messing with deployments, issues. That's not what I signed up for. I don't know about you, but that's not what I signed up for. I used to make jokes when I did talks when the DevOps first came out. Love the dev, hate the ops, right? Hate it. Wasn't my thing, you know? The ops hated the dev part. Why do we got to mix this all up, right? This is painful right here. You think people that are trying to find resources to stay in your company, and this is what they're experiencing, what do you think is going to happen? I mean, I know they're laying off people around the world right now, but remember, they always tell us, and it's always been proven in the numbers, there's way more work to be done in IT than there is people that they can find, train, and put out there. Don't forget that. So these 10 hours a day I'm spending doing this, I'd rather spend them somewhere else, be really honest with you, right? So this is starting to get concerning, right? Now we're talking about a large chunk of them not only have more complexity, but this is starting to have an effect on them. We don't like stress. We don't react well to that, right? When you go to work, do you want to be looking at the clock, or do you want to be going, Jesus, I got to go home because I'm late again. My wife's going to be mad. You know? That's kind of what you want to do. So 33% are saying it disrupts their personal life. Ouch. That means you're taking this to bed and can't sleep. Frequently stressed out. Not good. Water's rising, eh? This is not good stuff. And I see all your faces getting very long, right? So it's like I'm giving you lots of depressing stuff. Stay with me. It's going to get better, but not yet. 22% want to quit. I don't know why they said they want to quit. Why aren't they gone? You know what I mean? Anybody I've ever mentored, if you're not happy, find something that makes you happy, right? This is not the way to go through life. This is awful. Is anybody feeling this? In their job right now, you are? Oh, man. Is your boss in the room? Because I'm going to tell you to quit. No. So there's somebody for the live stream, and there's somebody in the front row here that's crying and nodding her head. And okay, that leads us into what I think one of the solutions are. So most of what we're describing, right, is a lack of process and the ability to control what's going on. Because a lot of times developers are out there, or these architects, making loose decisions in the organization to do something, and it has a financial impact later down the road they didn't realize. Or it gets some, I mean, that's common sense, right? To get something in your architecture you didn't account for. When it's in the cloud, that kind of stuff spirals out of control. A really good example of one was a customer I saw where, I don't know whether it was a developer or architect, somebody in a project made a decision to put a certain load balancer that was in one of those marketplaces in their cloud that they were using. They just clicked on it and said, oh, let's add a load balancer, we need one. Great. Somewhere down the road, SecOps, security operations, came in and said, hey, behind that load balancer are applications. So on that load balancer, I need labels of what applications are behind there. So they added a label, and then another one, and then another one. And they found out there's a limit, probably 255, because that's what we do in IT, right? We stop at 255. So let's just say there's 255. They have a limit. So what did they start doing now? They're looking at this, and they can't rip it out easily. They don't have another solution or time to go look for it. So they said, no problem. We'll add a load balancer to load balance the load balancers. And then that starts spiraling out of control. You know, of course it looks crazy. Of course it looks bad. But we're talking about going down a path that's automated, and all of a sudden nobody owns the responsibility here. So what's this costing, right? Well, a proper solution would have been something that didn't require this kind of label trickery, and you had no problems with putting as many of those labels as you needed on it. That's what the FinOps thing is about, is financial operations, giving somebody in your organization the say in what's going on so you understand what's going on in your own observability space, right? Understanding that cost and having processes in place to not let this stuff get out of control. And when it's done right, and there's a whole FinOps foundation we'll get back to in a bit, when it's done right, you have a lot of stuff in place where everybody knows how much they're spending on what they're using. And it's not that they don't want you spending money on it, they want you spending money and getting the most out of it. And these cloud providers and the interfaces you work with are not easy to understand. The billings that you see are not easy to understand. There needs to be a process around that to be able to leverage what you want to leverage and to do it in a way that makes sense for your organization. Everybody's different, that's for sure. I saw this at the beginning of this year, actually the end of last year, and put it in one of my slides, and I keep it in there because it's almost outdated. We got a couple more months, and I pretty much probably shouldn't use this anymore, but that's pretty crazy. I was listening to it was an IDC thing in Europe here about the cloud. You don't hear those kind of analysts talking about, when they get around 38% or 40%, then you're talking about a whole movement. She dropped an 80% bomb. I was like, where did that come from? You know, it wasn't like it worked its way there. It just showed up in her thing at 80%. I was like, good God. That's something you need to take note of when you see that go by. So this is about, probably now, most organizations are taking this pretty seriously. How many people see on LinkedIn, I've seen it quite a bit going by, just all over my contacts and stuff, where somebody's taken that practitioners from the FinOps Foundation, like the basic entry level, what is this stuff? It's definitely something you're going to see, and if it's not in your org yet, it will be very quickly. This stuff is proving its worth very quickly by putting stuff in place to prevent some of the stories that I just shared with you. My company became the very first observability company to join the FinOps Foundation, which is pretty cool. I couldn't believe somebody hadn't thought to do that already, to be really honest. But it's a whole area that people, just like I think I've shown you a little bit from the developer side where you're sitting, because I didn't see anybody raising their hand about being on call or anything like that for the ops side. But I think I've shown you there's a lot of data you're not aware of. There's a lot of stuff going on you're not aware of on the operations side that causes a lot of issues with companies, right, when they start using the cloud. And so having something like this in your back pocket, being able to have an organization that takes this seriously and tries to watch some of these these processes and put things automated into place to make your life easier. I mean, imagine a portal where you go somewhere and you can see what your spend was. I know how much my project costs. I know what my cloud costs are going to be. They're predictable, right? It's not surprising when things happen. You know what's going to happen if we do scale up. You can slide some levers and say, hey, let's say we do 1 million sales next month instead of 100,000. You can see what happens with your bills. This is hugely important. If you haven't looked at the FinOps Foundation, go take a peek. It's interesting, whether you're a developer or not. It's still very interesting. And I'm going to give you a freebie number 4 for this thing. So how many people here have been developing longer than 5 years? Pretty much everybody. 10? Only her? Oh, one more. Okay, 2. So why are you crying and upset with? So anybody's been doing this a while, you make a plan to do a migration to someplace, right? For your apps, your environment, whatever it happens to be. In this case, we're talking about going to the cloud. You have a wish list. What am I going to do? Step 1, 2. What are the things I think about? Architects love these things, right? What am I going to do? What step? What's the migration process? I'm going to give you the hint here. What's the first thing you should always, I don't care what you're doing, what technology you're looking at, what move you're making, what's the first thing you should always have on this list? What's the question you ask yourself? No idea? Whose responsibility is it? You ask for a cost. I think that's farther down the list. You don't want to ask who's responsible? So this is an example of an actual list I was given from a customer back in the day. And I won't tell you what was at the first one because it was wrong too. But you can see here's a list of things they want to do. They want to go down and, how are we going to migrate our data? What are our goals? It all sounds really, really common sensey, right? But think about how many architectures and places you've worked and things you've run into where you think, how the hell did that ever get in there? Who made that decision, right? The number one thing, the freebie I'm going to give you is, what is my exit strategy? So, especially when you're going into the cloud. Because of all the things I just told you, if you go in there, can you get out? What's it going to cost me to get out is the second question, right? I would say. That kind of goes hand in hand. It's pretty close, but please, please, please. I mean, you learned that in university, right, when you were studying development and stuff. When I add in a new component, when I add in a new library, how can I get out of this? That's open source kind of theory about that. So with that, we went through cloud and data and what that is, gave you a couple of examples around that. We looked at observability as data, because that might be surprising for people that don't know a lot about observability. But it tends to be more than what you're doing with your apps, a lot more if you're not careful. And we talked about FinOps being the crucial ops, because getting control of this cost and understanding what they are and putting processes in place and safety measures so that you don't shoot yourself in the foot every time you pick a new component for your thing. Then I gave you a freebie at the end, which is not on the list. Any questions? Any questions at home? Mail them to me. One down front. Okay, so I'll repeat this so that everybody back home online can hear this too. He was asking about, I'm just going to try to summarize. He was asking about whether I had said something about regulatory compliance for cloud data. I gave no examples of that whatsoever and didn't address that at all, I think. I'm pretty sure. Did I? You say it again? I can't hear you. Oh, big question there. Okay, how do you introduce FinOps in the organization? I think they have exactly that covered at the FinOps Foundation. You need to look at the FinOps Foundation like CNCF or the Linux Foundation, something like that. These are a collection of people that do this. They have a Slack channel you can join for just a request, and they'll let you join that. And there's channels like this to talk about this kind of stuff. So I'm not going to give the list here. It's not really part of the talk. But if you go there, I'm not kidding. It's a they're all about process. So they have quite a bit of process lined out for you, and assistant docs and help and stuff. They also have certification stuff in there. So they have whole checklists and processes and how they do stuff. It's really, really well done. Anybody else? I got 4 minutes for you. One more.
When it's a good time to move to the cloud?
When is a good time to move to the cloud? When is a good time to move to the cloud? Yeah, good question. That depends, right? I mean, it depends upon what you're doing. So for example, for the one I gave here, never, right? For them is never. That's a use case that just doesn't work in the cloud. So I really don't have an answer for that. That's kind of a sucker question, right? And they're recording me, so there's no way I'm going to go online with that one. Fair enough? If you give me a beer, maybe we'll talk some use cases. Anybody else? Another one.
Those 10% usable data there, so you said that 90% of the data wasn't usable. Are we talking about logs?
Okay, you're referring to the example I gave about Robinhood.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is when you collect metrics, the way metrics work is you have a piece of, you define something you want to collect, like CPU, and then you might subdivide that into labels. So you'll attach things underneath it that mean something to you. And when you start doing that, it starts scaling automatically, and it multiplies, and you get something called cardinality, and cardinality bombs. Explosions of data, lots of stuff coming, more than you thought. Some of the stuff, like with Kubernetes, is automatic. It just starts generating all this stuff. And if you're not using it, all of a sudden you have 50, across our customer base, 60% of them, 60% of what they're getting in, they're not using, just on average. And there's, of course, people that are higher and a little lower. Multiple ones I've seen in 80%, and that is just an example where like 10% of what they actually want to monitor, what they're interested in their applications, and what they want to tag and flag and have dials and knobs and gauges on their thing for people that are on call, is that amount of the data that's coming in. So ingesting it is one thing, storing 90% that you're not doing anything with is another. That's a pretty big waste of money, right?
Yeah, but you said that it's not used now, but maybe it will be used later. How can you know that?
Good question, right. So what we provide in our thing is a control plane with the ability to do something to analyze this. So you can see it coming in, and you can see what's not used. We sort automatically for the least valuable amount of data. And when you stop it right there at that point, either aggregate it or block it or whatever you do, it's not gone. It's just not persisting anymore. So if you define a project later that says, I need this data, or I need this label, or I need this whatever, you can readjust those knobs and dials, turn the aggregation off, and let that through so you can start using that in a dashboard or whatever you need. A really good example, one of the use cases we have is where there's some data that's not really being touched in a dashboard, it's not being touched in an alert, it's not being touched in a rule in any way or form, but it's been looked at like 8,000 times last month by 2 people. And you dig down in there, you look at the 2 people, and you're like, oh, those are my 2 best SRE, site reliability engineers. They probably know something that nobody else knows. Let's give them a call and find out what dashboard that needs to go into so everybody can learn from this, right? That's value for money. When you don't just want to drop it because you're not sure why. So first you're going to check with them, and it's a really important use case. Make sense?
Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome. 2 more. Okay, you get 30 seconds, you get 30 seconds, and they're going to yank me off here.
Hi, Eric. How would you go about checking out where in your infrastructure there should be more observability, like from the financial side? So how much does something cost, or is the cost, let's say, justified? Where should I be looking? I'm a DevOps, so.
Where should you look for that?
Yeah.
Or?
So like you said, like if the 2 of your best SREs are looking at something, how do you even come to that? Because sorry, I work in a small company, so yeah. I do multiple hats or roles, as you would say.
Okay, this is a really complicated and long question. So I
Sorry.
suggest you and I talk right after this, and I can give you a few examples around this. Part of it is scale. The small to a larger, in a large organization, they pay for the tooling to do stuff like this. And when you're smaller, you're trying to build it yourself. And you'll find at a certain point, the bottom line is that at a certain point in time, it gets really hard to do that by yourself. So you go look for things that help you with this, like the FinOps Foundation, like people that help them, align to them and believe in these principles. It doesn't come out of the box with all the free software. Short answer, sorry, it's short. We can talk some more in just a second. If you pass it to him and then sneak his in.
Yeah, real quick. Do you think there's any positive or negative outcomes of providing observability?
Do I think there's...
For positives and negative security.
Security value. Security is a whole nother story. I don't even touch on that. I know which company you're from.
Cheers. Yeah.
We chatted earlier, so I were your dad anyway.
Yeah.
The security part of it is part of your infrastructure and your process, which is what you specialize in. So if you do that right, then I guess you got that covered. What we're talking about here is not security related, really, in the sense of,
it's more financial.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about the actual data moving from point A to point B, not that it's secured or not. So, and the costs and stuff around it is got to do with usage more so than if it's secure or not. Make sense?
Yeah. To kind of add on that, like, I'm kind of still trying to grasp like the observability thing, but
yeah,
it's what I kind of understand is like you're helping minimize like data that's not being used or storage on the cloud that's not really important, correct? Or
yeah, so basically an organization is ingesting a lot of data and they're trying to do something with it.
Yeah.
And to do something with it involves making dashboards and deciding what's important to me, how I want to look at what my business runs, and what thresholds do I set so an alarm goes off, my beeper goes off, and I call a guy in because this thing is about to fall over, or it's being flooded and isn't working the way it's supposed to, or it's just gone. That's what observability is about, right? Being able to have a consistent view over your whole system. What we're trying to do is, and many of these second generation ones are also trying to do, is they're trying to move from APM to a cloud native world where it's so vast and it's automated to scale all by itself, and you have to react to what happens and not drown in it. And the last thing you want is your eyes on your infrastructure to fall over with your infrastructure, right? If it gets flooded, then it's useless, right? Then you're blind. And I think the best way to look at it is trying to keep the cost down on this. We're finding out that it costs a whole lot of money if you're not paying attention. And believe me, these cloud providers would love to send you as much data as they can. That's just the way it works, right? More water through the pipe, more money they make. Buy a new helicopter, buy a new island. It's the way it works. So being able to control that cost is what we spend a lot of time on, giving them the ability. I mean, that's what the FinOps Foundation is about. It's about fair use, fair pay, right? Not a bunch of stuff coming in I didn't account for and don't care about. And I can't, it's so complex I can't get my head around it. I don't have enough people. I don't have 400 developers just looking at my observability. I have 2. And they have beepers and they're stressed out. Did you pay attention?
yeah.
You know what I'm saying? It's like you're burning people up. I did a talk at a meetup in London, and it was really shocking. I had 2 SREs. I always asked the SRE in the room. There was 2 of them. One of them had been doing it for 2 years. That's about right. He hasn't been burned enough yet. The other one had been doing it 10 years, and I was like, how do you do that? I've never met one that's done it 10 years, because they burn out and do something else, usually go back to development. He goes, well, I kind of cheat. I go 1 year SRE, 1 year developer, 1 year SRE, 1 year. My colleague that I hired burned out on SRE 7 times. She's in her 20s. I said, she was getting ready to go back and find another one. I was like, why are you doing that? I said, come on over here. We'll tell people how to not burn out as an SRE. Come tell all your stories, right? It's a rough world.
Gotcha. Thank you.
I try to end on a high note. Here you drag me back down into a low note. I'm just kidding. Anybody else, or do I need to wrap this up? I got one in the front row.
Sorry, just a short question. whether I have understood it correctly, this FinOps is viable only for cloud deployments.
They're super interested in that, yeah. That's their main
okay.
focus, yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It's cloud
you.
billing, cloud, you know, it's unpredictable stuff they can't
So
understand.
for the old school of deploying stuff doesn't count?
To a data center?
Yes.
You still do that?
For some appliances, yes.
Yeah, of course, for some, right? But if any of your landscape is involved in the cloud stuff, the FinOps, go take a look. It's interesting.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody else? Thank you very much. You and I will talk over beer. And the one that was crying, here. That'll make you feel better.